sentencing on prostitution-related charges. The judge says the US rapper had failed to show sufficient evidence he's not a flight risk, and also cited admissions of previous violence made during his trial. The 55-year-old has been in prison since his arrest in September last year. For a roundup of the news on demand, you can subscribe to the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Times Radio Drive with Barclays Business Banking.
Hello, good evening. It's 4 minutes past 6 on Tuesday evening, the 5th of August. Thank you so much for being with us on, well, what is usually Pinar and Friends, but John's obviously on his halls. I've nicked his friends, and we're working on the title. Matt suggests Calum's Conflab. I don't know. We're sticking with Calum and Friends for now. Or
Calum's Chums?
Cal and his pals was a suggestion
Chums
earlier.
is alliterative.
Chums is nice, yeah. That's all right. That's all right. That's Tim Montgomerie, by the way. Hi, Tim.
Sorry.
No, don't apologise.
Not waiting for an introduction, just
No,
getting on with
well,
it.
that's fine. That's good. It's good to see you. And also Rachel Cunliffe, Associate Political Editor of the New Statesman. Hello.
Hello. I don't have an idea for
That's
a name
all right.
for the show.
No, that's okay. We're just kind of riffing.
I think Calum and Friends is fine.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, exactly.
We're friends,
Stick
right?
to the plan. The plan is working. Yeah, you are. We are all friends, which I'm thrilled about. Also, it's worth mentioning that Tim is doing the Times at 1 all week this week, which we're thoroughly enjoying.
You enjoying it? Is it going okay?
Yeah, it's really good. We're halfway two out of 4 so far.
Yeah, I was
good.
really nervous yesterday. I have more admiration for what you do now, actually, Calum, because it's all the technical and just making sure everything hits the time frames.
Oh, yeah, I'm bad at that.
That's what I'm not used to. So
Yeah, you think Calum's listening to us, but actually he's thinking about how much time left we have to fill
Well, you
before they go
are.
to an ad
It
break.
is-
Yeah.
He's not paying any attention to us at all.
Not a clue. Anyway, enough from them. No, right, come on, let's do Thought of the Day, shall we? We'll start with you, Rachel. What is your thought today?
So I am still thinking about the Online Safety Act, which came into force 2 weeks ago now, a week and a half ago, which requires you to prove your age if you want to view adult content, whether that's by scanning a driving licence or a facial recognition scan, or handing all your data over to a dodgy third-party company, possibly owned by Peter Thiel. And I was just checking the... if you want to access Reddit, you have to give your data to a company owned by Peter Thiel, based out in the US, that we have no scrutiny of here in the UK at all. And I've been checking the petitions website on the government, and there are nearly 500,000 petitions for signatures for repealing the Online Safety Act. It's the second most popular after calling a general election. So that gives you kind of an idea of people's priorities.
And how realistic it is to come to fruition.
Well, actually, the government have responded and said no, essentially. And of course they're going to say no, because this is legislation that was sort of dreamt up and worked on by the last Conservative government that Labour said they would support at the time, and now Labour have implemented it, and all the Conservatives who worked on it at the time are supporting it as well. And any time anyone raises any kind of concerns about this, the retort from the government is it's about protecting children. You had that last week in sort of very emphatic terms when Peter Kyle suggested,
I would say.
suggested that Nigel Farage and other people who were warning about this legislation were on the side of child predators like Jimmy Savile, which is something that the government has since kind of doubled down on that line. And I think that's quite unhelpful. I think we have to be able to have a conversation about, one, does this legislation actually protect children, or are children able to access this content by getting a VPN or finding a workaround, which, you know, teenagers are really quite technically adept at doing? And two, even if it does protect some children, what about the data privacy concerns? What about the fact that it's up to websites themselves how they do this, and it means handing over your data in sort of quite dodgy ways? What about the fact that a lot of other content that isn't harmful has been swept up on this? Parts of Wikipedia being censored. Katie Lamb's speech in Parliament on grooming gangs, that's now behind an age verification wall. You know, guidance on sexual health, guidance on quitting smoking, all of this stuff now. And I don't think we've even begun to have that conversation. And I think the number of signatures on this petition kind of shows that the British people didn't really know that this was happening, and also have some doubts as well.
What's also interesting, isn't it, is that this is an entire act, and its purpose is around duty of care and about accountability for platforms like Meta or TikTok or X or YouTube or all of these sorts of things. It's about what illegal content might be on some of these platforms. It's about protecting children. It's about, you know, trying to protect freedom of speech, but trying to regulate the internet. And age verification is part of it, but it's now the only part that people will talk about. Because the intentions may be good, but here we are discussing whether the age verification system is a complete disaster.
Well, it's really wide-ranging legislation, and I think most people can get on board with what the legislation is trying to do.
Principle.
But no country has tried to regulate the internet in this way. We are kind of trailblazing in this regard, and I think if you are going to be the government, be the country that tries to sort of draw up an entirely new form of regulation that no other country has tried, you have to be open to conversations about, well, this bit works, this bit doesn't work, how can you make it better? You can't just have a blanket, no one can criticise this. If you criticise this, you don't care about protecting children.
I still personally admire the intent of the legislation, and I think there is, it's probably, if you ask most parents in the country, that their worries about what their children are seeing online probably near the top of their agenda, and largely as a sort of a conservative, small c conservative, I would say it's parents' jobs to help their children navigate this system. What I think the last government did, and has been defended by this government, is a first, as you say, attempt to do something about
first
this.
draft.
Yeah, first, and it exactly is a first, and some of it will go wrong. And what I hope is that the government is more swift of foot to correct some of the implementation problems. As always, in so much of our debate, I think both sides have overdone it. The people in favour of it say it's essential for protection when actually it's modest and in some ways quite flawed. And the people against it say we're heading down the road of totalitarian states like China and Russia, which is ridiculous. Having a sensible debate about all sorts of things in politics is difficult. And I'm afraid this Online Safety Act is no exception.
Is there also a gulf here between the political process which saw this come into being and the reaction now it's real? And is there a lack of engagement with the process to actually understand what the implications and realities are going to be when an act becomes law that people are now only contending with? And actually that's an issue. If 500,000 people are cheesed off with it, it would have been helpful if they'd expressed that dissatisfaction 2 years ago. Well,
people did express some of the concerns, particularly around both data, like how you prove that you are above the age of 18, and also about VPNs and the potential for people to just pretend they're in another country and skirt around the regulation that way. And I remember, I'm not a tech expert, but there were tech experts at the time. I was saying at the time, there are flaws with this, and there was a kind of failure to engage at the time. I think part of it is a lot of politicians, they don't spend as much time online. It's a good thing that they don't spend as much time online. They're possibly not at the kind of front line of this. And I also think because the protecting children element was all about adult content, potentially pornographic content, there's a reluctance for people to go, I access that content and this is going to really, impact my life to surf the internet if I have to give a scan of my passport every time I want to look at content that is legal but that other people might find harmful. So I think there's a reluctance to have the conversation because people feel a bit squicky about it. Yeah. And now it's actually come into force and people are seeing the implication, the impact of it. Now the backlash is only happening, once it's already signed into law and too late.
Yeah. I'll tell you one very good thing about it. I can't remember what the site was now, but I did an online age verification the other day.
How old did it say you were?
33.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's good there. That's not bad.
For those who don't know, it's 22 years younger than I am.
It's a really interesting one. That right, Tim, give us your thought for the day.
Well, this is your backyard, actually, Calum. I want to sort of note the temporary, I hope, retirement of Kate Forbes, big figure in the SNP. Now, I'm not a nationalist, but I have a lot of regard for Kate Forbes. Two things, really. I think in a party which obviously his main issue is independence, but probably has quite a lot of socialist, big state leanings, I think she brought economic rigour and some realism to a party that needed it. I think that's a generally quite important thing in political parties where they may have sort of one big defining issue or a couple, but having some antibodies, having some challenges to groupthink. And I think she played an important role in that respect, in getting probably nationalism a bit closer to the centre. But perhaps the main thing, I'm a Christian, and I've watched certain Christians in public life being torn apart by the media at various times. It happened to Tim Farron when he was leader of the Lib Dems. And both Tim Farron and Kate Forbes have very traditional views, for example, on abortion and homosexuality. But both accepted that the law on those matters was fixed. They weren't going to try and change it. But a lot of people in the SNP and the Liberal Democrats in the media almost sort of wanted to look into their soul and say, yeah, but what do you really think about these issues? I know you want to, you were not wanting to change the law, but we need you to agree with us. And I worry about that, really, because, one of my favourite books of recent times is Tom Holland's Dominion, which really paints a picture of British history where Christianity has played a really important role in who we are and the best of us. And whether you look at the abolition of the slave trade or more recently forgiveness campaigns for debt in the Third World, generally I think Christian involvement in politics is good and for the benefit. And sometimes I think there's been a witch-finder mentality which has been regrettable. And so I completely respect why Kate Forbes has decided to go. She wants to spend more time with her daughter. And I think you know the geography of Scotland better than I do, but I think she was on a 4-hour journey every time back to her constituency. And so I understand why she's gone, but I hope it's not because of some of the negativity she had towards her Christianity. But it kind of helped. And I regret that people like Kate Forbes and Tim Farron aren't more central to our politics than I think I'd like them to be. Yeah,
interesting. One thing that sprung immediately to mind, I have to say, when she announced her intention not to seek re-election at the 2026 Holyrood election, was when we spoke to her on the podcast I do just after that leadership contest, which Humza Yousaf won, which was more than 2 years ago now. And it had been a bitter campaign. It had been really difficult and divisive and kind of awful, really, to witness because it had been so vitriolic in so many ways. And she said, we asked her about her return to the Scottish Parliament, and she said, I will go back and I will extend the hand of friendship. It remains to be seen whether that is reciprocated. And I've not spoken to her, I don't know, but I just wonder if it wasn't ever reciprocated. And I can't help but wonder that in the context of that leadership contest and the 2 years that have followed. And interesting what you say about I guess, kind of perceptions of these sorts of politicians. I'm actually struck by Joanna Cherry's comment on Kate Forbes' departure. She said, so sorry to read this, Scottish politics, particularly the SNP, is badly in need of more people of Kate's integrity. I might not agree with her about gay marriage, but I respect her rights to hold different views owing to her religion, and I admire her greatly. What a loss. And I wonder if that is the nuance you're kind of talking about, that actually people with Kate Forbes' outlook actually should be welcome and,
Well, look, you may have noticed the party I now support, Reform, has had a few difficulties about the trans issue in the last 24 hours.
Bumpy couple of hours, couple of days rather.
Now, I take a view that I think Nigel Farage has actually sort of reinforced today, is that Reform don't believe that, about men or trans people in women's shells. But actually, I think, a party like Reform or the SNP or whatever, you don't always have to agree on everything. It's childish to think that all these people have. Of course, you've got to have some core issues of unity, but imposing a model of can't speak out of line on this issue or that issue is, I think, one of the things people hate about politics, and it isn't good because if parties aren't having strong internal debates about a little bit like what Rachel's just been talking about, the Online Safety Act, if you don't debate and understand these things properly internally with people who understand and care about these issues, you get bad legislation, you get bad direction of the party. So a certain amount of intellectual diversity in political parties is important. And I think part of the reason why Keir Starmer's government is in so much trouble was there hasn't been a tolerance for dissent and alternative opinions in it. There's been a ruthless sort of oppression by the leadership of all alternative views, and ultimately that doesn't work.
Intellectual diversity. Certainly thought-provoking. Tim and Rachel are staying with us. We've lots to discuss, but aforementioned, there are timings that we need to pay attention to on this programme, so I will do my best to...
You don't want the intellectual diversity of marriage. It's all right, we'll talk about it in the break.
We'll do it, yeah. We'll do it after. Now what this is called is the tease ahead. Stand by for more intellectual diversity. It's 18 minutes past 6. This is Calum Macdonald in for John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business, bank on Barclays.
When you're growing a small business, you need someone who understands the ins and outs.
Search Barclays Business.
We're continuing our intellectually diverse conversation with Rachel and Tim on Times Radio between now and 7. Just to remind you that at 10:30 every evening on Times Radio you get a first take on tomorrow's top stories, because we bring you the next day's newspaper front pages with a panel of expert reviewers, including our own presenters on Times Radio, Carol Walker Monday to Wednesday, Henry Bonsu on Thursdays and Fridays, and Daryl Morris on Saturdays and Sundays. The front pages land at 10:30 and you hear them first on Times Radio. It's 6:20. Benjamin Netanyahu's met with a close group of his military chiefs and security advisors, and a statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office insists the Israel Defence Forces are prepared to implement any decision made by the government. One journalist in Israel, Yotam Confino, explained to us that Netanyahu does plan to go ahead with occupying all of Gaza, but it's not going to be a smooth process, especially since the IDF boss is not on board with the idea.
But before he can do that, he needs to put it to a vote for the entire government cabinet. And that could be as early as this week. And we also heard that the IDF chief, Eyal Samir, is opposed to this. So there's quite a lot of drama around this potential decision to occupy Gaza, because Eyal Samir, as you've just mentioned, he needs to obey orders, but of course he has the option of resigning. If he thinks that he's going to do something that's against international law or any other reason, he can of course resign. So this is what's being discussed in the TV panels right now. And I would also say that a lot of people are also speculating that this could be a bluff by Netanyahu. It could be a way for him to pressure Hamas and to be more flexible in the negotiations with Israel over a ceasefire.
Well, Israeli media now reports that Netanyahu's cabinet will convene on Thursday. Let's have a listen now to Sir Simon Fraser, the former head of the UK Foreign Office.
If it goes through, it will amount to Israel occupying the whole of Gaza. And the objective is, as they say, to militarily defeat Hamas and also to release the remaining hostages. And frankly, I think it can be very difficult to achieve either of those objectives. And then in the longer term, if they do take this step, they'll be left occupying this territory. What are they going to do with the territory of Gaza? I mean, there's no long-term vision there. There will be huge international opposition. And of course, there will be, most important of all perhaps, extensive further civilian casualties and deaths amongst the Palestinian population, which is precisely the issue which the whole international community is increasingly up in arms about. So it is a very provocative and challenging decision that appears to be being taken.
Well, let's speak now to Anshel Pfeffer, who is the Economist Israel correspondent and author of Bibi, The Turbulent Life and Times of Benjamin Netanyahu. Anshel, good evening.
Good evening.
Hi there, Anshel. Thanks so much for joining us. We need to consider, first of all, how we will determine whether this is a bluff on the part of Netanyahu or whether he is determined to pursue the full occupation of Gaza.
Well, it's not a bluff, and he's not determined either. Netanyahu doesn't have a clear strategy on Gaza. He hasn't had a strategy for the last 22 months since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7 and began this war. And Netanyahu's constantly been playing for time. He's in a very awkward political situation at home. He's in a very difficult position on the international stage. And he's seen how every, I wouldn't call them strategy, but every plan that his government has ordered the Israeli army to carry out hasn't led to any of the war aims being realized. There are still Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. Hamas is still even though it's been diminished and hit very badly, is still in control of parts of Gaza. So that's not about to change. And this talk of Israel, the Israeli army taking the entire city of Gaza. Currently, the Israeli army doesn't have enough soldiers to do that. It's exhausted after 22 months of war, not just in Gaza, also war in Lebanon with Hezbollah and war in Iran that ended only a month and a half ago. So there is this there's these slogans that Netanyahu has been putting out for throughout the entire war, but they're totally detached from reality. Now, he may give that order at some point. As you can see, they're constantly delaying a decision. Now, the cabinet, the bigger cabinet meeting, which is supposed to discuss this, has been delayed to Thursday, and they may delay it again. And even if they do give that order, it will take weeks and weeks to build up the forces for that. So it's not bluffing, but it is posturing.
Interesting posturing. And I suppose, excuse me, is Netanyahu, I suppose, counting on the international community to speak out against this, to give him something of an off-ramp in the weeks to come, by which time perhaps Hamas and Israel are back around the negotiating table? Is that how this could work?
That is certainly one option. Netanyahu's entire way of operating, of governing and maneuvering throughout his career has been to not shut off options, to try and keep all his choices on the table and not to make a decision until the very last moment. And after the very last moment, he's a notorious procrastinator. I think we're seeing it here as well. I'm not saying that he won't ultimately give that order, but he is trying to delay that sort of moment of truth before he sends the Israeli army back in again in full force into Gaza, and play around with the options, whether it's other military plans, whether there is a possibility of Hamas reaching some kind of a deal. And even if a deal isn't reached, just as long as he can kick the can down the road, remain in office, keep his coalition somehow intact for as long as possible, those are his main aims, just sort of buy more time. So once again, I'm not saying that there isn't the possibility that there will be yet another devastating Israeli military campaign in Gaza, but it's far from sure until it actually happens, and it could be weeks or even months away. And Netanyahu will be looking at all his options.
It's really fascinating. I'm interested in what the public opinion and the controversy is like within Israel itself, because we had that intervention from hundreds of former Israeli security officials sort of warning against or urging Netanyahu to step back. And we know there are this huge anxiety around the remaining hostages and what a move like this would mean if the IDF moved into parts of Gaza where the hostages are believed to be being held. Is any of that being reflected? Is any of that factoring in on the decisions that Netanyahu is making, or is it sort of purely about keeping the coalition together? And is there any potential of some of that opposition within Israel of influencing the situation?
Well, so far we're not seeing any signs of that, and it's not just all these former security chiefs who have called for an end of the war. 71% in the most recent poll, so a huge majority of Israelis now are in favor of ending the war and reaching some kind of a deal to release the hostages and for this war to at least to pause for a significant period, because nobody really thinks that Hamas is going to go away. But that is, 70% of Israelis cannot force the government to do anything without an election. We're still over a year away from when an election has to be held. And Netanyahu, for him, the most important thing are his own coalition partners and his right-wing base, and that may be just around 30% of Israelis. But they're the ones that he's fighting to keep together behind him right now. Now, whether he will change his mind or make another decision based on public opinion, I don't think it's going to be the public opinion, at least certainly not at this point, over a year away from an election, which will sway him. I think Donald Trump is much more likely to be the one who's going to sway him rather than Israeli public opinion.
Anshul, it seemed to me that very fascinating your analysis of the dynamics of Israeli public opinion there. I've always thought Israel's system of proportional representation is so pure, giving this power to sort of the marginal parties. And obviously political parties that have come to power never want to get rid of the system that's put them there. But is there any serious debate or prospect of a referendum or something in Israel that could reform the voting system to stop Israel being hijacked by these extreme parties? Is there any possibility post sort of Netanyahu's interest in avoiding the trial, etc., of the main parties coming together and changing this system, which I think from the outside seems to be one of Israel's fundamental structural problems.
Well, Tim, it's something that has been discussed many, many times over the years, and there has been a couple of sort of short-lived experiments in changing the system. They didn't yield much better results either. But I think if you look at Israel's current predicament, both security-wise, with the war that's still going on in Gaza, the hostages still being held, so the international pressures on Israel right now, the corruption of the current Netanyahu government, their attempts to push through very controversial and unpopular reforms to what they call reforms to the legal system. A change in the electoral system is so far right now down the national list of priorities that maybe after the war is over, when it's no longer Netanyahu who is just dominating the discourse, maybe there'll come a day when we can start talking about that again in Israel, but I don't think it's anywhere close.
Well, I'll keep my hopes in check then.
Anshul, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. We'll speak again. That's Anshul Pfeffer, who is the Economist Israel correspondent and who wrote Bibi, The Turbulent Life and Times of Benjamin Netanyahu. Rachel and Tim are staying with us. We've to discuss immigration. We've to discuss your party. No, I don't mean your party. I mean your party.
Yeah, there's two your parties at the moment, isn't there? Isn't that, 'cause that's what Jeremy Corbyn's calling? That's one of the names they've been using for the left-wing party.
That's right.
We could start a party right now, right here.
Yeah, we
Our
could.
party.
Our party. The party. Everybody welcome to the party.
And Callum is wearing shorts. Listeners don't know. So you're dressed for a summer party.
Party atmosphere in the studio.
Always. I said yesterday to Jane and Fee, who made the same observation, and I said there are 2 months of the year where I can get away with wearing shorts, and usually August is one of them. Although I would argue it's not quite warm enough for it, but I'm doubling down. I'm going for it anyway. Right, lots more to go with Rachel and Tim, and you can WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353. Thank you for your suggestions for names of this segment. Calum Co, Calum's McNuggets. Thanks.
I like Calum Co.
Calum Co's got alliteration. It's nice.
That might stick. It's better than Mike's suggestions, which involves the words crackpots and cronies, so we won't be reading this one. So.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, let's stop now.
I want to know who's the crony and who's the crackpot.
I think we're both. I think that's the implication.
Yeah. Vote now while you listen to the news. While you listen to the news, here's Martin Williams.
Across the
the tools and support to help you move forward and grow your business.
This is Times Radio. Thank you so much for being with us. Tuesday evening at 6:35 and at 7 o'clock, Kate Borsey joins you for the evening edition. Hello, Kate.
Hello. Lots to keep across. We'll keep a very close eye, of course, on what we're getting out of Israel. I know you've been reporting this as well, the decision to or not to occupy all of Gaza. Currently, the IDF, the Israeli Defence Forces, are in around 75% of the territory. Will they go all in? What are the risks involved in that? And as I know you've been talking about, there is an internal division when it comes to whether this is the best approach or not.
And I think Anshul Pfeffer's analysis a moment or two ago was actually added to that. The turmoil, perhaps, of Netanyahu, whether he actually is committed to the idea of occupying, whether it is something of a bluff, whether he's kind of depending on trying to find a way out, either from his own cabinet, from international allies. I think that internal division in Netanyahu himself is quite an intriguing one.
I was reading a really interesting piece in the New York Times earlier about Israel trying to shift the narrative on how the international community views their approach to Gaza. And of course, one extreme is a full-scale invasion, really, a full-scale occupation. And the other is the fact that they've actually sent the Israeli foreign minister to the UN Security Council meeting in New York today. You know, Israel is not a fan of the UN, but the situation there will mean that he'll discuss the Israeli hostages' conditions in Gaza, what the international community can do about it. It's very much focused around the hostages, but the fact that the Israeli foreign minister is there is notable as well. So look, we'll gather opinion, maybe a bit of consensus, and we'll keep an eye out for anything fresh this evening on that. In tomorrow's Times Today, we've got a brand new story for our listeners about the civil service and staff sickness. I'll leave that one hanging for you. A couple of curious stories for you here, Calum. There's been uproar in Sweden. The Swedish Prime Minister has come under fire. He's admitted that he regularly consults AI tools to help him run the country. How do we feel about that?
Oh, I don't like that.
No.
I don't like that.
No.
Well, firstly, AI was meant to take the boring jobs, right? The kind of boring data spreadsheet jobs. It wasn't meant to take the jobs of like being Prime Minister. And
is he consulting it? Is it?
It is.
Is he consulting it for
Christensen,
to make decisions or to provide data and information?
So he says he's used ChatGPT, and there's a French service called Le Chat, rather imaginatively, and he says I use it quite often. If nothing else, then for a second opinion. What have others done? And should we think?
Second opinions.
And should we think the complete opposite? Those types of questions.
Yeah, so I find it quite useful for pulling together lots of relevant links that I then go on to click through to myself.
Yes.
So give me data on, I don't know, the number of prisoners in England's jails. And then it pulls together lots and lots of sources, and then you can click through and make sense of it.
Doesn't it also just make some up?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I asked it something the other day, and it said, if Donald Trump is to be re-elected. And I thought, hang on, this is out of date for some reason. So I think I must have been using an old version or whatever.
I see.
So it can be quite unreliable.
Or it's predicting the future, where he runs for a third term.
Yes, because it's not completely out of the question. In fact, something that we'll cover in the Trump dump is Donald Trump saying to one of the news networks over the last few hours or so that he probably won't go for president again. You know, remember all the drama leading up to whether he would seek re-election again?
He
and he just kept us teasing.
He 100% will. He will.
Well,
he threatened to run to be
they'll
First
have to change
Minister
the
of
Constitution
when he was visiting a couple
for
of
that.
weeks ago.
And here's a quick one that might tickle your interest as well. The Times has got a story tomorrow about the decline in convertibles. It's something that makes sense
overdue.
now that I say it. But what's happened to the good old convertible? Apparently we are preferring SUVs. But it's made me mourn a little bit, Calum. My first car, I will caveat this with I learnt to drive in my mid to late 20s. My first car was a street car, which was the little Ford Ka, but this is the convertible version. So I, of course, looked like some sort of Barbie. No, there were no cameras in those days, Tim. And I was so proud of my convertible car. I just thought I was the bee's knees. It was the era of the Audi convertible, the Audi TT, which is no longer in production, a classic.
But how often did you actually take the roof down?
Yes, good question. Whenever I could. I mean, I was driving it around London, so it wasn't as if I was ripping through the countryside in it where I'd get very, chilly I'd have my gills smacked around with cold air. So I was quite sort of happy wandering around London in my convertible car.
I just think there's so much pollution in London. I quite like the roof.
I mean, I'm talking 25 years ago now, probably. So
maybe that's why
I didn't even think about it then.
Maybe that's why it's dying out. Like, it wouldn't occur to me to ever take the roof down.
And I don't believe you, Kate. I think there are photos. You're just not willing to share them with us.
I actually don't think I have got a photo of me in this car. Yes, there we go. So we are going to mourn convertibles.
Or indeed celebrate. Has anyone ever looked good, apart from Kate Borsey, has anyone ever looked good driving a convertible?
I mean, not if you're over the age of 60, I have to say. It should just be flat out banned for anyone who's trying to relive some version of their youth.
They'd suit you in your shorts, Calum.
Thank you very much.
Convertible in shorts.
They would. Yes, they certainly would. My very stylish and classy shorts. Thank you. Right, thanks, Kate. Is that anything else? Are you all good?
Just loads, basically.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, twisting and turning through 3 hours.
We love it. Evening edition from 7 o'clock with Kate Borsey. We will see you in 20 minutes. Right, let's get back to our conversation with Rachel and Tim then. Immigration cannot be the silver bullet to fix Britain's economic growth and strained public finances. This is according to David Miles, a member of the Office for Budget Responsibility, the Spending Committee. Immigration, Tim, bubbling once again this week because of the treaty with France, which is going to kick into action any time now. And we're starting to get a bit more information because the treaty is now publicly available. And our Home Affairs editor, Matt Dathan, was telling us on the programme earlier that there are no sort of defined numbers as to how many migrants will be returned, or indeed how many will end up moving here from France, with that sort of approval caveat in there. That both sides, the UK and France, can terminate the treaty with 1 month's notice. That those who are being sent back to France are likely to be in the UK for 3 months before they go. And there are questions about how certification of these migrants being adults will actually work, given they may not have documents and paperwork with them. And I've actually just spotted that in Article 16 of the one-in, one-out migration deal, France won't be giving us any information about the people they're sending to the UK. And the question asked by Lara Brown, who is commissioning editor at The Spectator, is, how can we know someone is safe to admit to this country if we have no data on who they are? The clause says, under no circumstances shall personal data be transferred from France to the UK, and for transfers from the UK to France, the communication of personal data shall only take place if such communication is necessary for the implementation of the agreement.
Well, I think that's a brilliant introduction, Calum. This is an absolute nothing burger of an agreement. You know, why we gave Macron his state visit to Britain before we had nailed down the detail of this, it is beyond me. Now, Labour, the government, are obviously at the moment saying this is a good agreement. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But every time you look at it more closely, you know, I think when the Times first reported this agreement, I think we thought that it might be 100 people. Now it's not just 50, it's up to 50. Yeah. And it's all very unclear. And I think Andrew Griffiths, the Tory MP on the media rounds today, said, if this is 1 in 17 of the migrants that are crossing the channel regularly at the moment. He said, if you think you're a migrant who's already often travelled across continents to get to France, if this agreement's in place in full, you still have over 90% chance of getting to the UK and remaining in the UK. It's no disincentive at all. And look, the whole smash the gangs narrative, even if it was implemented properly, is fundamentally flawed. Look at the drugs trade. Organised crime makes so much money from the drugs trade, makes so much money from people's trafficking, and will continue to do so and stay ahead of the authorities. I'm not saying we shouldn't prosecute people who do wrong things, but ultimately this trade will survive because there's a lot of money to be made in it. Until we attack the demand for crossing the channel, until there are consequences for people who want to cross the channel, whether it's returning into somewhere like Rwanda, this whole deadly business will carry on.
But is it worth a shot, Tim?
It's not nothing, but it's not cheap. And it's fundamentally a distraction. It will not work in slowing down this trade. And already we know this year, we're already at record numbers of people crossing the channel. So I think you obviously need law enforcement for something that is illegal. But until you smash the demand for crossing the channel, smashing the gangs is ultimately a distraction.
I mean, you pointed out there, Tim, that somebody who has fled a war zone, risked their life to travel across continents, will not be deterred after all that by the final stretch, as it were. Actually, I agree with you on that. I think that the exact same thing also applies to the threat of the Rwanda deal, and it was the Conservatives who were saying this is the deal that we need, and we only need to sort of get a couple of deportations and suddenly no one will come. And I think that is fundamentally underestimating the level of desperation of the people involved. I guess some who are economic migrants may decide it's not worth the money and not worth the risk, but for the majority who are genuine asylum seekers, and I think that is the point as well, that a high number of these are genuine asylum seekers, and the reason they make these very dangerous journeys across the Channel is that the UK has shut down not all but virtually all safe and legal routes of claiming asylum from other countries, unless you're from a particular country like, say, Afghanistan, although we're not that happy with Afghanistan either. So all of the criticisms of the French deal could be made of the Rwanda deal. There is the point that the French deal is actually looks like it's actually happening, so that's it's reality rather than fiction. And I think it's worth saying that Reform don't actually have a plan on this either, other than send the Navy out and do what, shoot at them? Is that the plan, or send them all back to France? Which, how you're going to do that when the French don't want to accept them? There's a lot of
the French say they don't want to accept them. I think we need to take a much tougher stance towards the French.
But how?
Well, ultimately, I do believe in a naval intervention. It should not be beyond the possibility of Britain and Ireland to stop the boats and say, and it's a dangerous thing to do, to basically turn back boats in waters. But until we do that, until you make it clear that no one is going to come into our country illegally over the Channel, this trade will continue. And what I'm recommending, I'm fully aware, Rachel, is a dangerous and difficult process. But my fear one day is we will wake up in Britain to the fact that people who've crossed the Channel illegally in those small boats will commit not just an economic cost on us, which is what is motivating concerns about the asylum hotels, but terrorist outrage. When that happens, if that happens, and I hope I'm wrong, the demand for the kind of action that I'm recommending won't be seen as an extreme reaction to what is happening. It will be seen as a mainstream reaction. And I just think there is a level of complacency and caution about this problem which will disappear the moment that outrage happens in a country.
Sorry, would the Navy have licence to fire on these boats if they weren't turned around?
I don't think you'd fire. I don't think you would need to fire on them, but you would turn the boats back. And I absolutely concede there would be a risk that in that process, it's a dangerous thing. Yeah. People may die in it, and of course,
people would die in it. And
once the blood is in a sense on the British Royal Navy's hands, it's a big political issue, which is why we won't do it. But I tell you what, the blood is on this nation's hands every day when people cross and drown. The problem is, it's. I think at the moment we are by not dealing with it, we are responsible for deaths. Well, it's a question of whether we confront it and nip this problem in the bud.
I think the suggestion that there is a terrorism risk when there's also homegrown terrorism, and there are the crime rates. If you look at people who are here legally or who were born here, it's pretty muddy data, and you can't just extrapolate and say they're more likely to be a terrorist offence by somebody who has come over in a small boat. But more generally, I think on the issue of migration and legal versus illegal migration, which is kind of what you were getting to, Tim, because you were saying sort of there's a reckoning coming, essentially, and people will not put up with it. There's some really interesting polling out by YouGov today on British attitudes to migration of all types. And one of the things that is fascinating is almost half of Britons think that there are more illegal migrants in this country than there are legal migrants in this country. And that's out by a factor of 10. I mean, it's difficult to get an exact figure for how many people are here illegally or who crossed illegally. But if you take the highest estimate, there are 10 times more legal migrants in the UK than there are illegal migrants. Now, you can have a conversation about that and the economics of it, and maybe we'll do so in a moment, but it is so obvious that public perceptions of what the challenge is and how big different parts of the challenge have been massively distorted by the rhetoric around it.
I'm not sure how relevant that is at all. I think it's a distraction.
You don't think it's relevant?
Not really, actually.
That people
I think the real
vastly overestimate the numbers?
It's not it's not wrong, it's a substantial fact, but the real issue is that there are thousands of people coming into our country every month, illegally, and we do not know who they are. And so what you said a few minutes ago about, well, there are terrorists and there are criminals in our own country, well, I think that's, to be direct, is really naive, because if you are a foreign power and you're a foreign terrorist organisation and you want to bring terrorists into Britain, crossing the channel illegally in this way is the obvious way to do it. And there is some concern already about Iranians who potentially mount an attack on the Israeli embassy, who come over this way already. A lot of it is subject to various controls, but there is a real danger at the moment that terrorists can come into Britain almost through an open door. And so just to say, well, we've got problems already, I think really does ignore that point.
I didn't say we've got problems already. I'm saying that is one aspect of a crisis that is much, much, much broader, and the vast majority of people are coming to the UK are doing so out of desperation, in part because we do not have legitimate routes for them to come by, which would enable us to check them and do background checks and all the rest of it. And it sounds, I'm not going to say conspiracy theory because I have too much respect for you for that, but it sounds like a very specific niche aspect of this policy challenge, that to go from that to therefore we should basically upend maritime law and send the Royal Navy in to directly cause the drownings of thousands of people. I think it's disproportionate.
Rachel and Tim, thank you for the discussion there. Let me just read some of the messages that are coming in that I've just been having a glance over. R says, just because there are more legal migrants than illegal does not mean that we should accept the illegal immigrants. They tend to cost more because they don't come to work, they come to claim benefits.
We don't let them work. We don't let them work.
One of the things that does come up on the text quite a lot in these last couple of days is the gig economy and becoming delivery drivers and these sorts of things.
Sun did a really good campaign exposing that.
Indeed. And I wonder if that's maybe what R is getting at. They claim benefits. Yes, in fact, look, here you go. They join the gig economy and probably don't pay tax, says this person.
And to Rachel's point, of course, most of them never do go home. So eventually they may be temporarily prohibited from working, but that doesn't last long.
Robert says, totally agree with Tim Montgomerie's tough line on small boat migration. What else have we got? Oh yeah, Richard says, would you remind Tim that this agreement is a pilot and future numbers of migrants being returned will depend on how it goes? So you are. Consider yourself reminded.
Thank you for that.
This is Calum Macdonald in for John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help move your business forward. Search Barclays Business.
Get a first look at
your party ever get off the ground? I'm not talking about your party, I'm talking about your party.
That's clear.
Thank you.
Our party.
Whose party?
Not our party.
Whose party? Not ours.
Not
yours.
our party.
It sounds like a riddle now.
But is it yours or yours?
Well, I actually get the feeling that neither Tim nor I would be invited.
Oh, yeah, almost certainly I think that is true. Of course we are talking about Jeremy Corbyn's new political electoral tour de force, which doesn't have a name yet, I don't think, Rich. Where are we at with this? Because they're having a conference, aren't they, in a few weeks' time?
They're having a conference, and there are also plans to do, I think, a series of events over the summer to kind of discuss, because it's a discussion, it's a collaboration. Yeah. So maybe we'll get a clearer idea of it in autumn when we're back. But there are still big questions about the name, and I think we've done that joke now.
Sure, we have.
but
we've tried it, we've tested it.
But the leadership as well. When Zara Sultana announced she's quitting as a Labour MP and put out that statement, and then it took kind of 48 hours for Jeremy Corbyn to respond in any way, there was a kind of sense of, wait, was this all agreed beforehand? And I think it's pretty clear that it wasn't agreed beforehand. Now, you can argue that actually it's about, as we said at the top of the show, it's about, what did we say, intellectual diversity?
Intellectual diversity, yeah.
And having a big, robust debate about what is this party, what does it stand for, who's going to lead it, rather than just having it all agreed by a couple of people behind closed doors and it's open and it's transparent. Or you could say that it's pure chaos and is really damaging the, and I use this word carefully, momentum that a new left-wing initiative would have had to just have the opening stories about this new party just be about disorganisation and, really, to be honest, infighting.
Yeah. Do you know what they stand for, Tim? Your party? Do you know what they will stand for?
I do. And I think there's clarity. And I think those commentators in the proverbial Westminster village who've underestimated this force are very naive. Look at what those sectarian party candidates at the last election achieved as Gaza independence. You know, they unseated John Ashworth, for example, prominent Labour, or would have been a cabinet minister. They came very close to unseating Wes Streeting. Yeah. And this was, Gaza wasn't even then quite the issue I think it is now. I think one thing about Jeremy Corbyn and Sultana is they have a few issues on which they're very clear on. Climate, Gaza, equality. And, of course, those independent candidates succeeded when there was still some hope that Keir Starmer might be an effective Labour Prime Minister. I'm not sure so many people think that he's a particularly effective prospect anymore. So there's a lot of material for the left to go on against this government. And we're probably likely to be hitting tougher economic times. So they're going to have more sort of economic angst to feed on. And, yeah, Rachel's absolutely right. The launch was messy and, there's people's front of Judean tendencies already. But I don't think we should underestimate the rising power of the left around the world. Look at the independent candidate in New York, socialist candidate who's now leading the polls. There is something in the political water where people are fed up with the mainstream parties and the centre.
And that brings me to a question about the Greens. They are voting for their new leader of the Green Party. In fact, the Scottish Greens are also voting for their new leaders at this point, which is interesting. A changing of the guard, Rachel. Does this? If you're a member of the Greens and you're looking around at Reform UK and you're looking at Jeremy Corbyn's effort, whatever it turns out to be called, are you sitting there going, "Hang on a second, we've been around a bit. Why are we not making this much noise?"
Yeah, I think certain Green Party members are doing exactly that. Zach Polanski, who is one of the candidates, I'd say probably going to win the Green leadership contest, is kind of saying exactly that. There is already a left-wing, populist, eco-focused force on the left, and it is the Green Party. You've got to remember with the Greens, though, that for a long time now, they've essentially been like two parties standing on each other's shoulders wearing a trench coat, and there's been the kind of urban, young people, eco-populist, kind of radical, I don't mean like radical left, but like quite lefty version of the Green Party. There's also been the rural Greens who've gone after sort of traditional Conservative voters who are upset about the Conservatives' environmental record and want their lakes and rivers and farms and rolling fields all protected. And those are two quite different political strands. And one of the things that this leadership contest in the Greens is about is which version of the Green Party is going to triumph, and if it is the left-wing radical version, is there space? I agree with Tim that there is a lot of anger and frustration on the left of British politics, but is there enough of it to fuel two left of Labour populist parties, or do you really have to pick one?
Well, I had Owen Jones on the Times at 1 yesterday talking about this, and he was very clear that there would need to be some sort of alliance with the Green Party. I think the Green Party at the moment is committed to fighting every seat, and obviously that would potentially need to change. But, if the left are sensible, and they're perfectly capable of not being sensible, they will need to do some sort of arrangement with the Green Party.
Well, there are a whole lot of splinter groups on the right, aren't there, as well? So it's... people.
Touche.
People at every point on the political spectrum are capable of egos and infighting,
the left,
I think.
have a bigger history of infighting, don't they?
We'll talk about this after the show.
How many prime ministers do we have, courtesy of the Conservative Party, in the last few years?
Yeah, talk to Kemi Badenoch and
That's
Liz Truss.
infighting, isn't it?
They're having a bit of a thing at the moment.
There we are, intellectual diversity for another hour. Thank you both so much. It's so lovely to see you and spend time with you. Tim Montgomerie and Rachel Cunliffe. Tim will be back on the Times at 1 tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow we've got it's the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima.
Oh wow!
And we've got an interview with Caroline Lucas, who's over in Japan, about that.
Amazing. Listen to Tim tomorrow from 1. I'll be back tomorrow from 4. Don't go anywhere though. Kate Borsey comes next with the evening edition. Have a good one.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, Calum. Have a great night. It is 7 o'clock. This is the evening edition with Kate Borsey. Coming up,
we are going to go with our military forces in order to conquer the rest of the area that is being held by Hamas.
Sharon Haskell there, Israel's Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister, speaking earlier today. We now know, after an Israeli Security Cabinet meeting, that there is some resistance to this plan and possibly splits within Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Much more on this throughout